Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera. In September, you spoke of the politics of dispossession when you were addressing the UN General Assembly. Do you believe Israel is currently trying to ethnically cleanse the West Bank and Gaza of Palestinians?
Well, looking at the facts and the disastrous consequences in Gaza, no one in the right mind could deny the fact that it's either ethnic cleansing or gross apartheid or genocide. Clearly, it has come to that.
You mentioned genocide, and I'm sure you're aware that in March the 26th, the UN Special Rapporteur on Palestine said there are reasonable grounds to believe Israel is committing genocide. Do you agree? Do you see that Israel is committing genocide?
Yes, of course. Look at the casualties and devastation and giving no opportunity for anyone, children and women and the elderly to survive. What other terms can be applicable?
You know, Prime Minister, when people in the Global South hear that, the thing that comes to mind is they remember what the US president said on December the 12th, that Israel was conducting indiscriminate bombings in Gaza. And then on May the 8th, when he said that the US bombs have been used in the killing of civilians. And I think for many people in the Global South, they wonder, why doesn't the US stop sending weapons if they know it's being used to kill civilians indiscriminately? Do you call on the US to stop the transfer of weapons?
Well, I think the international community made it very clear, abundantly clear, that authorities and governments, including the United States, should do whatever it can. First, just complete cessation of hostilities and stop the war. And whilst I think such a rhetoric is quite acceptable at times, but the action seems to be on the contrary. That's why I say sometimes most countries in the West seem to be quite hypocritical between their lectures on human rights and democracy, at the same time condoning, if not tolerating, these obvious atrocities against innocent population.
So do you think the US should stop transferring the weapons, though?
I mean, they should do whatever is necessary just to stop the hostilities.
Do you think that includes the ending of weapons transfer?
That includes not only weapons, but also they have the influence, mechanism and diplomatic skills all combined to be able to force. I mean, it's just impossible to imagine that one man, Netanyahu, can dictate the affairs of the world.
International human rights groups like Amnesty International on January the 26th, 2024, Human Rights Watch, December the 8th, 2023, stated the US is risking complicity in Israeli atrocities by continuing to supply weapons and diplomatic cover. Do you agree with that? Do you think the US is complicit in the war crimes that these international organizations are talking about?
I'm in no position to deny that, because the facts is evident that knowing atrocities being committed, whether it's your ally, your friend, or a nation that is you have a nexus with you, you cannot condone this. Otherwise, you have no moral stature or standing in the world to talk about international relations and humanity, or even order and human rights.
I'm curious, Prime Minister, do you convey that message to US officials? And if so, what kind of response do you get when you say, look, it's undeniable, you cannot deny that you're complicit in what international human rights organizations are calling war crimes? How do they respond?
No, the international community has expressed through United Nations, through bilateral, multilateral mechanisms. I remember during the APEC conference in San Francisco, I did appeal to the United States, particularly in front of President Joe Biden, who did listen very attentively to my expression, a passionate call.
Did he ever respond?
No, there was no response, but I was addressing him as a friend, as an important ally of Malaysia. has been, in that position for decades.
How does that make you feel?
Well, I, of course, cannot deny that I feel certainly disappointed, not out of interest of my personal position on Malaysia, but because you can't bear to see the daily atrocities inflicted upon these women and children. It's just atrocious.
As people, many people in this region know, the conflict didn't begin on October the 7th. And many international human rights groups, including even Israeli human rights groups like Beit Salem, have said in several of their reports that Israel is practicing apartheid against Palestinians. Do you agree with that? Do you see Israel as an apartheid state?
Well, policies and their actions prove to the fact that it's going beyond apartheid to genocide in Gaza. But don't forget the West Bank is daily atrocity inflicted upon people. And,
but these reports, of course, were issued before this round of conflict began,
yes,
by Beit Salem, by Amnesty International, by Human Rights Watch. Do you agree that there was an apartheid foundation even before this conflict began?
Well, it's long before. People talk about the Nakba, and following that, a continued annexation is a colonization. How do you expect countries to accept the fact that in this age, for whatever reason, countries are being colonized, and you don't expect, for example, a resistance, whether civil or armed resistance? The ANC, the IRA, I mean, look at all these experiences of these countries. People have a right to respond and demand independence and freedom in their fight against colonization, what Edward Said talks about, dispossession.
So you see Israel as a colonial apartheid state?
Clearly, how do you explain their action against the Palestinians and the fact that they continue to control lands that belong to the Palestinian people?
Do you recognize, for example, it's also against international humanitarian law to attack, to take captive Israeli children and civilians and innocents?
Yes, I think we remain consistent. That's where we differ with the West. But we then question, why don't you condemn and do whatever is necessary to stop the atrocities against others?
Is the US pressuring Malaysia to try and change its stance on the Gaza conflict? You mentioned, I think, on the 31st of October to Parliament, you'd received 2 démarches. What exactly is the US asking Malaysia to do?
Well, we have taken a strong position, which I think is very consistent with our independent foreign policy stance in defending human rights and the legitimate aspirations of any country, be it our strong position vis-a-vis the ANC in support of the then Mandela. But they can then inquire. They did raise the issue of my engagement with Hamas. And when I'm here in Doha, I did meet Ismail Haniya and Khalid Mash'al. But they should know what transpired. I call upon these organizations, including Hamas, to try and accommodate and support the resolution and the call by Arab neighbors and to secure a peaceful resolution and settlement. But of course, I have my sympathies because I hear atrocities, the sufferings, including the personal sufferings due to the loss of their children and grandchildren, and I had to convey my sympathies towards them.
Is the US pressuring you to change your policy and your stance?
Not probably obliquely, but because we maintain good relations with the United States, we continue to do so. I made it reference to the Emir of Qatar, who would take that position, which benefit the international community. If someone has to engage with Hamas, you like it or not, it does represent some portions of the Palestinian people in Gaza, and you cannot deny that. You see towards antecedents of history, ANC condemned as a terrorist organization by many European countries.
And that will be the
States.
objection from Israel and the supporters of Israel is how can you have engagement with a group that they see and is categorized in Western countries as a terror organization, as a group that is criticized by international human rights groups too because of some of its actions or some of its operations towards Israeli civilians. How do you respond to that?
I'm not here to defend any excesses by anyone, but this why this hypocrisy of condemning Hamas on the 7th of October and muted as regard to the 60 years or more of atrocities against the Palestinian people. So I think, therefore, we need to explain that this engagement, which is purely diplomatic, political, to persuade them to understand the other concerns, is of benefit, as the Qataris have done, even in trying to secure the release of hostages, is through contact and engagement. You don't need to agree with everything that they do, but I think a principled stance would help.
Broadening out to wider developments in the region, a US Treasury Department official has been reported as saying service providers based in Malaysia are enabling Iran to move its oil. Are they?
Well, that has been an allegation, but they have not given any evidence to suggest that.
So you've not been given any evidence by the US?
No, they were suspecting that some companies were involved in the ship-to-ship transshipment in the international waters. I said, do you give evidence of that? If we do, then we will have to put that on check, because as far as we're concerned, we accept the decision of United Nations. But of course, we do not agree with the unilateral sanctions imposed by the United States. So our position is sanctions can be only decided by the United Nations.
And you're sure that no Malaysian entities are engaging in any activity that's banned by UN sanctions?
If they deduce evidence, we have, of course, to stop that, because we want to be part of the international community that accept the ground rules.
Is the US requesting anything from Malaysia at this point vis-a-vis this question of allegations of Malaysian entities?
No, contrary to what is highlighted in the media, but I think in the sessions that we have with United States Treasury representative seems to be more subdued, more orderly, and we have given a clear undertaking that we do not transgress international rules. And if there's evidence, we certainly cooperate. There's no question about it.
Will you work with any US requests vis-a-vis US unilateral sanctions?
Unilateral sanctions will be difficult, because I think countries do not generally accept that.
Well, the US has imposed, I think, sanctions on 4 Malaysian companies in December. How will Kuala Lumpur respond to that?
Well, we said you can impose using your power and authority, but you have to give evidence. And I can assure you that we will give all the support necessary.
But is there any countermeasure coming from Kuala Lumpur?
No, we will have to continue to engage with the Americans to say, look, we have to defend the right of our companies if they do not transgress international law or decisions by the United Nations. But you can't, try and be deemed to be bullying smaller states, particularly a loyal friend for a long time.
On that point, you were also quoted on March the 4th during the ASEAN summit as saying, Malaysia's friendship with the US, with Europe, with Australia should not preclude us from being friendly to one of our important neighbors, precisely China. You've also spoken about how you've spoken of pressure being applied. We do not want to be dictated to by any force. Is the US trying to dictate to Malaysia anything related to its relations with China?
No questions are asked, and we did explain that China is an important neighbor. We have not had any issues with them, and I think it's our duty, not only Malaysia, but ASEAN, to be independent and observe the principle of neutrality and do what is best to focus on our economic development and therefore increasing trade and enhancing investments. And that is being duly conveyed to
Is the
United
US
States.
asking you to downgrade some of your relationship
No,
with
not
China?
openly. I mean, I know there's been, missives, but we are not going to respond to that because we say America cumulatively is still the largest investor in Malaysia, and there's still new investments coming in. And I think we look at these policies. There's no bias in favor or against any country.
Talking about the South China Sea, do you feel ASEAN is failing to negotiate its code of conduct policy to try and manage tensions there? This has been going on for more than 20 years.
Yeah, it is an issue. It is not necessarily tense development. No, probably one or two countries did raise some of these concerns. We use bilateral and also we call for multilateral mechanisms to continue to discuss and negotiate. We have problems with all our neighbors. I mean, in terms of position of neighbor borders, but we are negotiating with them. We are, bordering Thailand, with Singapore, with Brunei, with Indonesia, and Sabah and the Philippines. And but it's not tense. It's just civil, orderly discussions, negotiations, and I think this will continue. I mean, ASEAN is a very strong, cohesive force.
All right. If we talk a little bit about some of the domestic developments in Malaysia, how do you respond to critics who will say the economic reforms, the democratic reform, that whole drive, it's slowed down? You haven't met the aspirations that you spoke about before you became prime minister. And your opponents, I'm sure you heard from the opposition, they say it's part of politicizing, stabilizing your coalition at the expense of not going after powerful people with corruption investigations.
Well, we have been in charge the last 1.5 years, and you want to correct decades of excesses during that period is, of course, not acceptable. We have seen attempts in the past, even in Eastern European experience, where countries are, gung-ho about affecting quick reforms will be disastrous to the economy and the political setup. In our case, contrary to these assertions or aspersions by the opposition, what is most important is governance. What have we been successful is to check the abuse by leaders, the cabinet members, from squandering wealth through direct negotiations, through massive billions of dollars of tender. And we have to stop that.
But the opposition would say, why were charges dropped against, for example, the deputy prime minister, your ally, while investigations are continuing against Mahathir Mohamad's sons, Daim Zainuddin, other figures? Is there a politicization of the investigative process? How do you respond to that?
I have explained on the issue of DNA on the Vice Prime Minister, and that is for the Attorney General to explain. They don't find incontrovertible fact to support their initial charge, which was initially preferred at the time when the other party was in power. Now, then why do we then proceed with investigations? It's up to the Anti-Corruption Commission. I mean, if you are found to have amassed billions of dollars when you are in power, and don't talk about whether you're in the government or in the opposition. I mean, the former prime minister is still going through a trial. And I'm not here to be pressured to stop the trial. I mean, Najib is still undergoing major trial now on the corruption charges. And, a coalition is from his party, but there's no pressure on me to stop the trial. the ongoing case. Now, then why do you take charge against some members of opposition? Because Mahathir supports the opposition. Daim did not support the opposition, which seems to be quite neutral. But there have been cases as investigated by the Anti-Corruption Commission that billions of dollars have been amassed, and up to them to investigate, and for the Attorney General to prefer charge if he finds conclusive evidence, and for the judiciary to then adjudicate and decide. It's not for me. You see, the problem is that I inherit a system which is authoritarian and semi-dictatorial and controls the judiciary, controls the prosecution and the investigations, and they assume this is the position. This is not a position.
On media freedom, sir, I'm sure you know Malaysia has dropped 34 places in Reporters Without Borders 2024 World Press Freedom Index. Are media rights under threat in Malaysia?
I'll take an issue with that. Have we arrested any journalists? No. Have we banned any newspapers?
Well, there were brief arrests of journalists in October 17th, 2023, like Kian Wong. He was released, I think, after 24 hours, but he was investigated. There are journalists still being investigated, right, for sedition.
Yes.
I think that's something you have a past of speaking out against, right?
No, I speak out against sedition because of political cases. I've been called Antichrist Dajjal. I've been called a Zionist agent. There was no charge, not even investigations. But when you touch the royalty, the institution of royalty, then you draw the line. That is the red line. Our system, a constitutional monarchy, the rulers, the sultans, are in no position to respond. And the charges are
What does that
frivolous.
sedition law need to be changed or scrapped? Or?
Not when it comes to the members of the royalty. For example, there's a recent
Why
case.
is that a red line if it's criticism? One understands, of course, in every country, defamation, libel laws apply. But criticism...
It's not criticism. It's an allegation that the king is involved in or complicit with the prime minister to set up a casino, which which raised the sentiments of the people, and which is of course not healthy. Firstly,
because it's defamatory.
Is defamatory, right? And secondly, you touch on the constitution. There is no position to defend themselves, and factually wrong. I mean, I have not been asked, or there was not one single proposal to set up a new casino. This is just an example. And then you talk about media freedom, and I agree. But then you incite race riots. Do you allow that? You say in Malaysia only Muslim can be candidates in any elections. We have 40% non-Muslims. Where do you want to throw them? So there's a limit. You have to have laws. It doesn't matter whether we are being downgraded. But what is important is that criticisms are allowed. I've been abused in every manner, and I've not charged them. The issue is when you touch, for example, condemning race, condemning religions, and you are inviting and inciting riots. And we cannot afford this in our country. And more so when you touch members of the royalty. I'm not talking about lay majesty to the extent that you can't question. There are questions, and we don't charge them for questioning. We charge them.
Shouldn't royalty be open for valid criticism that isn't defamatory? The public should have some right to oversee what their rulers do?
Yes, questions are asked about the king. Is it your jurisdiction? Why was the decisions taken? There was no investigation or charge.
Right.
When you condemn the king, then there will be a charge.
Final question, sir. After all the years, you've had quite a journey being in opposition, being an ally of an ex-prime minister, being in opposition to him, having gone to jail twice, and now being in power. Has Anwar Ibrahim changed?
Well, in a way, it's right. Changes. I put on ties more often than before. But the principal issues of the fundamental issues like judicial independence, anti-corruption, good governance, racial tolerance and minority rights. These I observe, and these are to me fundamental in our country. They can't take this as an issue against me because I'm not to compromise on these issues. And it's tough. Even within the coalition, they understand my position. I'm not prepared to interfere with the judicial process.
Is there anything you're disappointed about now that you're in power, that you feel you would have liked to achieve, that you feel restrained back on?
Well, to be honest, yes, because I would have thought that you have a leader who will not take salary and show the propensity to work hard and to affect change and reform and do what's best for the country, strong against corruption and excesses. I would be supported. I think from the results of the last by-elections, we have been given the support. But I am a
Who do you feel is not supporting you enough in the anti-corruption
Yes,
drive?
yes. When we launched this anti-corruption drive to the very rich and famous, the billionaires, you'll find that many of these cronies and the political apparatus, including the opposition, using Islamic Party or the Malay Party, who would defend. To me, it's horrifying to have people talking about Malay supremacy or Islamic rule when they condone this squandering of billions on the public purse. I would have thought, in the past, that it would be easier. But it's not necessarily so. But do you then concede or compromise because of this? No. I believe finally in the wisdom of the masses. But our reform agenda will continue.
Anwar Ibrahim, Malaysian Prime Minister, thank you so much for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you.